Hi, my name is Mark Robinson and I'm on the Ops team here at Fresh Expressions. Today, I'm chatting with Rachel Oatridge.
When you read the Bible, it's all about transitions and people being on journeys. Whilst it's a struggle and it's a challenge because we like to be fixed, we like to be comfortable, we like to know what's going to happen, it's about holding that quite lightly, really. Connection is the key. So obviously connecting with God is absolutely fundamental for everybody in the family. I think connecting with one another as well through all of this. So yeah, there've been bumps in the road, there's been difficult times, but I think what we've really tried to focus on as a family is that connection with one another.
Good afternoon, Rachel. Welcome to the podcast. How are you today?
Yeah, thank you, Mark. I'm really well, thank you. Good to be here.
Let's get into it. Why don't we start by you telling us a little about where you're at? Because my understanding is that you are sort of in between things. And so why don't you tell us a little bit about where you've come from, where you're heading to, and sort of the how and the why of that stuff, if that's cool.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, no problem at all. We got involved in pioneering when my husband was still in, I suppose, a traditional Baptist ministry. So he's an accredited Baptist minister. And we were involved in a church that was, fairly standard, fairly recognizable. And the church had called Jonathan, my husband, to come and help them to be more missional and outward focused. And I think this is always a challenge for a lot of established churches. What does that actually look like when they get down to it? And there was a certain amount of struggle with that. And as a result, I think we felt this kind of push and a pull out of that established kind of ministry, really. So a push kind of because it wasn't really a good fit for us in the end. But that pull as well, because we really felt called by God to be doing something different. So alongside Jonathan being the minister of the church, we were really just reaching out to our village that we lived in. We lived about 3 miles from the church. In quite a large village. Our kids, it was the only place we could get our kids into school when we moved to the area. So that's how we ended up here, which we really felt was a God journey. So we'd been asking since we moved, what's our role here? What do you want us to do? And I suppose our pioneering journey probably started even before that when we were kids, because we were very much brought up in households by Christian parents who really taught us to just love our neighbour. And so that's what we've endeavoured to do wherever we live, but maybe in a more intentional way and putting a bit more time into it in the village that we live at the moment. During COVID, a couple of families from church who had kids with additional needs were struggling to access the online church that we had and asked if we could do something different. So we had a smaller gathering at 9:00 on a Sunday morning, and my teenagers were not terribly impressed about that early start, but threw themselves into it and really got involved in leading that, which was really exciting to be doing that kind of ministry very much together as a family. And then we'd met a couple in our village who had said to us, can you plant a Baptist church in our village? Which was not our intention at all to begin with. But just where the Anglican and the Methodist churches were up to at the time just wasn't scratching where it itched for them. So because they were in our village, they'd expressed a desire to connect in with church somehow. They weren't going anywhere else. We invited them along to that Zoom church. And then someone else, another family in the village who had previously connected into our toddler group, she started to come along with her kids as well, which was really, really excited. So these two families live in our road. And then after COVID, the two families from church dropped off, interestingly, when we had asked people to really for it to be a bit more collaborative. So for other families to take a lead in sharing the story, etc. So we lost the two families from church, and then we carried it on because the two families from the village really wanted to be involved.
Well,
we got friendly with another family who we just met with walking around our village and being connected in with a primary school. And when Jonathan left the church that he was part of to embark on this new season in our lives, this guy asked him, what are you doing for church now then? So he explained about 9 o'clock on a Sunday morning, which by this point we'd started to call Messy Family. So nothing to do with Messy Church. It wasn't based on a Messy Church model. It is intergenerational, intentionally. But it's just because we live in a village called Messingham. And so that's the Messy. And one of the kids said we should call it Messy Family because families are messy and we're like a family. So Jonathan explained about Messy Family, but Jonathan's very impulsive. He's a real activist. So he's saying, no, God, help me to be patient. I'm not going to ask him this first serious conversation I've had. And the guy said, oh, that sounds really interesting. I'd really like to come along. So him and his son sort of started to come along then. But over time, really interestingly, it was running for 2.5 years, something like that, post-COVID. We've had just a real shift in the last 6 months where one family dropped off because they became a foster carer. They adopted a little boy during lockdown and then became foster carers. And they literally have, 7 kids some days. So to get up and come along on a Sunday was just too much. Right. Another family, they've just reprioritized. The kids are at a different stage of life and they've got a different focus. So they don't want to meet up quite so often because we had been meeting most Sundays. So Jonathan is still meeting up with this dad to do discipleship, and they're reading through a book together, and that's kind of all happening. But I suppose one of the hardest things was to stop something. So we had tried some things. So connecting in with lots of pioneers, we know that it's really important as pioneers to be able to start something and stop something. So we tried an allotment in our village to see if we could get connected into the community. Well, we found that the times that we went to the allotment were not the times that other allotment owners went to the allotment. So we stopped that. Then we started off a coffee afternoon, hoping to connect in with not just people who were retired and free in the afternoon, but specifically wanted to time it so that parents leaving school could come along with their kids. And that we ran that for a year and it had a certain amount of traction. We were journeying with a certain group of people. But again, it just didn't feel like that was where God wanted us to be and what he wanted us to do. So we stopped that again. So then when this kind of Messy Family started, this was like really exciting. This is what God wants us to do in our village. This is where it's at. So it was a little bit confusing when it seemed to be fizzling out and kind of falling apart. But I really think that God was taking us to a new level of understanding of, one, trust in him and that he's got a plan. And two, that just because we start stuff or God starts stuff doesn't mean that it's going to last forever and it's going to be ongoing. So that was earlier this year, really at the beginning of this year. And so we just spent time praying and thinking about what it is that God would like us to do. So part of stepping away from church was we were pioneering in our village and we really felt that God was asking us to enable other people to do similar stuff where they lived across North Lincolnshire, where we're based. So there's quite a large urban centre in Scunthorpe, very industrial, but most of the rest of the county is very rural. Lots of little villages where chapels and churches are closing right, left and centre. And God's given us a real passion to really journey with people who want to see something vibrant in their communities that's an expression of his community, his love. So we started to gather people. We pray weekly in a village or a place in the county, Jonathan and I together, or with other people if they want to connect in with that. And when we pray monthly, we gather a group of people who just want to see light in the the different areas around the county. The The other thing that we needed to do when we stepped away from being part of the Baptist church that we were in was obviously to feed our kids. It's always a good idea to have some money coming in.
Yeah.
We weren't going to be planting Baptist churches. So there was a real question of how are we going to be supported in this ministry that we really believe that God's calling us to. And we're firm believers that we should be able to support ourselves as far as possible. And we're not adverse to working and earning our way. So we're very fortunate. We were connected with Rural Ministries, who are an amazing organisation. They've been fantastic for two things. Really recognising our calling, listening to our story and being able to affirm that calling of God on our lives. And this is not something that they had supported previously, but they're quite a pioneering organisation. So they were really willing to get on board with that and to see where God was going to take it. And they also gave us some seed funding while we set up our business and got that up and running, which was just so beneficial. So we set up a business. We're both trained life coaches now. Jonathan had done already some coaching within his kind of ministry role. I'm a trained occupational therapist, and I had done some coaching in that role, but then probably for the last 10 years, had a real desire to train as a life coach because I just so believe in the power of it to help people to become the best that they can. So I did my training, Jonathan did his training, and we had always planned to set up our own business. But with COVID and our call out of church, it really was kind of, okay, God, do you want us to do this now? So we set up the business and it's been growing ever since then, which is really, really exciting. And I think part of our journey and story as well would be that we kind of thought that we would have the coaching business as a separate entity that was going to fund our mission enabling. And the mission enabling would be the separate thing that like working with churches and individuals and groups. But actually what's happened is it's all gotten incredibly messy. There's a bit of a theme here in our lives. There's just that real crossover where some of the mission enabling actually pays us, which was a lovely surprise. So, for example, we're contracted with a Methodist circuit who really wants to unpack the God for All report, which is a national evangelism and growth strategy, mission strategy from the Methodist connection. So the God for All report, they wanted to unpack it and work out how to implement that on the ground. So we've been doing church consultancy and coaching with leaders and groups of people and individuals within the Methodist connection in one circuit. So that's been really exciting, both in terms of seeing God at work in people's lives, but also the fact that it actually pays into our business and helps to support it.
Brilliant.
And on the other hand, we've got the business side of our work that a lot of people would see that as a real secular, sacred divide, but it is the complete opposite. So we really believe that we're called to be pastors to the business community. So whether that looks like turning up at networking events and just being willing to listen to people. One of the other things that we do on a regular basis is we run a co-working event on a Thursday. And that's just, we use a space that's a community hub. We encourage people who are working from home, working for themselves, running their own businesses to come together and work in the same space. We offer coaching at a reduced rate during that time to get people off the ground because we're working with a lot of small businesses that can't necessarily afford commercial coaching rates. And actually, what's happened, and this is part of the transition, is as one thing has died away, the messy family, we started to have loads of more conversations in our community that's been forming in our co-working event, where people are really asking questions about spirituality, asking questions about the Bible. What's the difference between Catholic and Protestant? All sorts of things that are coming up in the media, the news, that people want to talk about. And so we're really feeling that God's asked us to turn our focus towards that business community and asked us to really invest time in them as we seek to see his kingdom come in individual lives and within that community. So that's kind of like where we're up to. It's all crazy, messy, but so much fun
great,
at
though.
the same time.
It's brilliant. It's funny hearing. So I had the privilege of hearing these stories from lots of different people, and I really do start to see some similar themes that come out. And one of those being, sometimes we can have a very tidy idea about what we think it is that God wants us to do. And sometimes indeed it is tidy. And we crack on with that and we start it. And then halfway through, feels like God throws a spanner in the works, or maybe the world throws a spanner in the works, be it COVID or be it, something else. But how then God then takes that and turns it into something else. And also that thing of often how it can often end up being in those spaces where we're already operating, and the natural spaces that we're already operating. So with the coaching stuff that you started to do, although that's a direction that you felt like you had to go in, but how that's transforming and how God's just saying, "Yep, this is it. Let's go for it." It's really exciting to hear, and I love seeing how God sort of manages that. Normally, I ask people like, "What kind of challenges have you been facing?" But I think you've unpacked that already. Are there any big challenges that you're facing ahead with the stuff that you're embarking on, or is it still very much you're trying to figure out what it is?
I think it's not so challenging focusing on a new area, because I suppose in some ways, even though it was a worship-led model, worship-first model of pioneering previously, and this is obviously very different because it's a very much community first, then sharing our story, if we're thinking about the God-send model that Michael Moyner writes about in his book, we're at the stage where we're sharing stories with people and continuing to build that community, really embedding the whole thing in prayer. Challenges within that, I think there's a couple. I think for us as a family, I think that's the challenge. Really? Because our co-working event is called Harbour. So if I talk about Harbour, that's what I'm referring to. Harbour is during the day when they're at school, and my eldest is just about to leave for university. So she's going to be on a very different path. But for my 15-year-old daughter, what does church look like for her? And I think that's another area where God is just teaching us over and over again the different depths that we need to let go of our imagining of what church actually is. And that real question that we're constantly helping individual and churches and groups to grapple with. What is church? We're grappling with at a deeper and deeper level all the time. So what does it mean for my daughter to have that Christian community that she's connecting in with? So I think that's one challenge, because ultimately, as we imagine at the moment, I'm sure that God's going to shake this up in the future. But, Harbour might look like if we form a community where people are exploring faith, it might look like having tea together at the end of Harbour, and then, looking at the Bible or something. We don't know what church is going to look like for that group of people, in which case she could be involved in that. But at the moment, there's definitely that kind of transition phase. But I really believe that we are called to be a transitional people. And I think as soon as we get settled, there's a danger in that. When you read the Bible, it's all about transitions and people being on journeys. Whilst it's a struggle and it's a challenge, because we like to be fixed, we like to be comfortable, we like to know what's going to happen, it's about holding that quite lightly, really. And I think the other thing for us, because we are on the whole self-funded, it's in business we call it the pipeline. So you're always thinking, right, well, I've got enough work today, but what about 3 months' time? And this is harder when you've got dependents, because whilst we might be able to do without stuff, we don't want to deprive our dependents of things. I think that's really important as Christian parents. I've met so many Christian or kids of Christian parents who have been put off the church because they've had to do without, or they've had to do without their parents or whatever. So we're very mindful of that pipeline of having enough money coming in. And obviously that's where our faith in God comes. And he has provided work and connections and finance in incredible ways. I couldn't begin to tell you in the short time that we have of the faithfulness of God, that actually, although my kids might not be part of a massive youth group, they have actually been able to grow their faith. So I'll give you one very quick example, and this is extreme. But we had an envelope through the door just shortly after we had both decided to give up our nice, comfortable salary jobs to embark on this adventure. Envelope through the door. We opened it together. We'd all arrived back from somewhere as a family. There was a card in there. There was nothing written in it other than the message about God blessing us. And there was a wad of cash. And we counted that cash out as a family. And the girls' jaws just got lower and lower towards the floor as their mouths dropped open because there was £1,000 in there.
Oh my goodness.
Now, that has not happened since. That's not a daily occurrence by any stretch of the imagination. But it was so pivotal for them to see God at work in such a tangible way. And the timing of it, where we had just really given up our salaries, that, God is so faithful to say, I've got you. I've got this. So even in those challenges, we're really very aware as a family that God's got us. And
incredible.
His grace and faithfulness will always be there.
There's so many things that strike me in that. And what's really striking a chord for me, again, as a parent as well, and as a family in ministry, my wife is a curate in the Church of England, so we're trying to figure out what does our future look like. But looking through that, asking those questions through the lens as a dad, as a parent, and trying to make sure, well, even the way I'm phrasing this question, trying to make sure that they maintain a faith, or trying to make sure that we do this. I guess we've got this thing of always wanting to be able to help our children make good decisions. And so on this journey of ministry, it's always trying to figure out how do they fit in all of this with us as a family, as a church community, and all of that. But going back to the point you were making about like what even is church, and that common thing. I mean, most people listening to this, and most people involved in the Fresh Expressions movement will appreciate that question. Well, what is church? And realize that that's a very loaded question for some. And it's part of the wonderful thing I love about this movement is the creativity that people get within that question about saying, well, we know the knee-jerk response to church being it's a place that people go to and sit in pews and maybe sing songs and do some weird looking liturgy, if depending on how familiar people are with it. But we know that it can be so much more, and that can be an incredible journey. And I love the idea of doing that with the whole family and getting their side of it, because as well, it's also remembering that there are so many of the friends that our kids have in school who have no experience of church. Whereas I think a lot of our generation were churched, had some form of church, but there's so many kids who have no idea. And that's really exciting because it means that church can indeed be anything. It doesn't have to be just have the starting point of the older traditional models. Not that there's anything wrong with that. Yeah, but realize people connecting God in lots of different ways.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But it's really exciting.
Yeah.
I was going to start asking about how do you... Pioneering can be a lonely ministry at times because even despite what I've just said about all the beautiful stuff about church being this new frontier that we can do new things and make things up and go on this journey with God and just go crazy with it. But often that can come with people not understanding what it is you're doing. and it can be hard to put your finger on the pulse of exactly what it is. How do you describe it? And so it can be lonely. Pioneering can be lonely. So how do you guys keep yourselves well? And how do you keep yourselves well in your walk with God? And I'm going to ask you this so personally for you, but also as a family. How do you keep yourselves well spiritually, mentally, physically in all of this? Because it's a crazy ride in some ways.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. Absolutely is a lonely place. And I think because of that, connection is the key. So obviously connecting with God is absolutely fundamental for everybody in the family. I think connecting with one another as well through all of this. So yeah, there've been bumps in the road. There's been difficult times. But I think part of what we've really tried to focus on as a family is that connection with one another. So I'll give you one example as a family. So we've got two daughters. So one of us, as in Jonathan or myself, will take one of the girls out for breakfast each month. And then the next month we'll swap over so that our girls know that they have that one-to-one time with a parent. And, people say to us, gosh, your kids tell you so much stuff, like what's happening at school and everything. And I think that's because of that simple practice, not original to ourselves. We picked it up from someone when our girls were really small. But there's just one example of how we connect in as a family. Another one is because Jonathan was in ministry in the church from very early on, he was able to take that time off between kind of 4 and 7 where he could really connect in with family. And that was almost sacrosanct, really. People stopped phoning us during between 5 and 7 because they knew that they just weren't going to get us on the phone because that was family time. So when they come home from school, we're there to listen. And I think because of that, then we have that connection. So maybe they don't have the connection with lots of other teenagers that, follow Jesus. But we're fostering faith within our family through being able to talk about pretty much everything. I hope anything that the girls want to talk about. So I think that's really key. Both in terms of on a human level, but also a spiritual level, that we can talk about faith. We can talk about the problems that there are in church. We can talk about the challenges that we're having as a family or connecting with people. And then making sure that we do have those connection points. So when Jonathan was still in Baptist ministry within an established church, we were very fortunate to meet a couple called Pete and Kath Atkins who were running the Lincolnshire Pioneering Community, and just being able to connect in with that community. It's a learning community, it's a support community. Instead of feeling like we were really odd, like nobody understood what we were trying to do or get at, but there they understood, and we really found a place of belonging. And that was really, really important for absolutely all of us as a family. So we connected in with them as a family. One of the other things, and I would heartily recommend this to anybody who's stepping out into a pioneering role, actually just for life, it's a good model, is we've got what we call an accompanying group. So I suppose some people might call it a support group. We just like the idea of accompanying people, probably because we're coaches. So we wanted that for ourselves too. Just 5 or 6 individuals or couples who also follow Jesus, who operate within this kind of world to some degree, in different ways, I suppose. We meet up with them every other month on Zoom because they're all over the country. And they just give us that. They listen to us, they discern with us, they bring in that prophetic voice. And there's also the accountability that ask us the really hard questions that maybe we don't want to face ourselves, but they'll ask it. But one of the most powerful things is when I go on and I see that screen full of people who are all just there for us, and they are really for us. I'm so overwhelmed by the sense of love that they have. And so for me, that's one of the Christian communities that I connect into that I think make up church for us. And I know that's probably hard for some people to understand, but my understanding of church is becoming much more like it's a network, as well as having that local expression of community. And the other thing that we do is with the other folks that lead the Lincolnshire Pioneering Community, which we help to lead as well now, we have a huddle, I suppose some people might call it, where basically we do group coaching. So 3 or 4 times a year we get together. One person chairs that, and we basically all coach each other, listen to each other's stories. Where are we up to? Again, bringing that listening, that discerning, that prophetic voice of people who are doing similar stuff to us, where they're feeling like they're being called to enable mission across a whole area rather than just in one specific location. So those, I would heartily recommend. Those have been so life-giving, just like a real safety net for us. Really, really important.
It's so good. I often talk to friends about life in ministry is one of those things. It's a bit like children sometimes. You can talk about having children and you can talk about what it's like, but until you have children, it suddenly changes. You suddenly get it.
Absolutely.
And like it's similar in ministry, and indeed different types of ministry. So we're currently in the Church of England machine, and we have lots of friends who are also in the Church of England machine, and they get it. And those friendships and those relationships are so valuable.
Absolutely.
I realize we have pretty much come to the end of our time, but I never let anyone go without asking this final question, because I think it's so important. Which is, there's people listening who might be starting out, they might already be going, they might have not started, they might be thinking, oh, I like the sound of this. I've never realized church could be something different. What do you want to say to those people?
I'm not sure I could boil it down to one thing, but don't journey alone is probably the top thing. So find others, get a coach. Plug there. We get coached. We coach other people who are pioneering. Just don't journey along. Maybe it looks like a support group. Maybe it looks like building a team around you. Don't journey alone. I think listen first. Go slow. God is the 3 mile an hour God. I can't remember who said that, but he goes slow and he will never move fast enough for us sometimes. Sometimes he'll just come out of nowhere and shock us, but I think generally he moves slowly, and so don't be afraid to go slow. If stuff doesn't get off the ground immediately, it's fine, because we're called to listen, we're called to be, we're called to love, not to set up a church.
Yeah.
We're called to make disciples, and that does not happen, in 6 months. That takes time. And don't be afraid to stop. I think that would be one of our biggest lessons. And, it's a bit of a cliche in pioneering terms, but don't be afraid to stop. Sometimes it's right that things die and something new grows out of it.
Rachel, I feel we've merely, again, this keeps on happening, just scratching the surface of some of these things. And who knows, we may have you back on to unpack in more detail some of these other things. But thank you for joining us. It's a real privilege to hear from you and hear some of your advice and experience. We the team will be praying for you guys, especially as you're forming this new season. We pray that you would hear clearly from God and you would know the Spirit with you. Bless you. Thank you. And until next time, take care.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Mark. I really, really enjoyed it. I'm sure we could talk all day, but another time.
Good stuff. See you later. Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to this episode. Hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like to find out more about what Rachel and Jonathan are doing, you can check out their website, which is oatridgecoaching.com. If you want to connect with us, you can do so via our socials and through our main website. All of that is on freshexpressions.org.uk. And finally, if you've been inspired by what you've heard today, but you're unsure of where to start, Godsend is our amazing toolkit for creating new Christian communities. There's loads of practical advice and real life stories. It's a brilliant starting point. So visit godsend.cloud. Take care.